Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us at O'Donnell Learn for today's webinar, Collaboration and Creation, Effective Faculty and Designer Relationships. My name is Sandy Keeter, and I'm a professor at Seminole State College of Florida. Although I'm an IT professor, I'm very comfortable with technology. Learning design is not my forte, although I think I've become pretty good at it over the years. I was one of the first at Seminole State to move online in the early 2000s, and I've also worked with O'Donnell Learn as a subject matter expert and a Canvas course builder for about 7 years. I feel that learning designers are the first key in building and delivering a successful course, and collaborating with them is so important. The easiest way of defining roles in online course development is to view the faculty member as a subject matter expert and the instructional designer as a learning technology expert. Faculty is primarily responsible for course content and assignments. We define what students consume and interact with, but the designer is responsible for how students interact with that and consume with the content in an online setting. Our session today is going to be a good one. It should be less than an hour, including interactive discussions and Q&A. You'll notice a chat button on the bottom of the screen. Please introduce yourselves to the group in that area if you haven't already, and make sure all panelists and attendees is selected from the dropdown. Also use the chat throughout the session to share comments with the entire group and put any questions you have in that space. Please also note there's an option to turn on live transcription in the Zoom control bar. Today, Carrie O'Donnell, O'Donnell Learn's founder and CEO, is going to lead the discussion, so I'll hand it over to Carrie briefly to introduce herself and our wonderful guests and get us started with today's session. Over to you, Carrie.
Thank you, Sandy. Thrilled to have you be our host here. And I'm thrilled to co-facilitate this webinar with Karin Sandberg, who is a senior learning experience designer at O'Donnell Learn and has actually played a lot of, she's like a utility player at O'Donnell Learn. She's played a lot of roles for us, including market research. And she really understands what's needed to create great learning. So I just want to say that we are really committed to reimagining the way that learning happens with you. And with you starts with collaboration. So we're thrilled today to have Dr. William Pelfrey from Virginia Commonwealth University and Dr. Stephen Huizenga from Central Ohio Technical College. And Karin will introduce them more thoroughly, but welcome guys, and we're so thrilled to have this discussion. So I wanted to start, as any of you guys who have been in our webinars will know that we often start with a little bit of interactivity and getting some information from you. So the first thing we want to do is start with a poll, with 2 polls. And Molly, if you could put these polls on, we're just trying to kind of get a feel for how collaboration is happening at your institutions. So please fill it out. And do the best guess on the percentages. Molly, when you think it's time, please show us the results whenever you feel like it's slowed down. There you are. Okay. So what percentage of faculty? Yeah, 5 to 10%. That was our guess. We were trying to figure out, there was no way you wanted to make this, less than 25, 25 to 50, 50 to 75. But there are only less than 20,000 learning designers on college campuses across the country for 1.5 million faculty members. So it's really hard to get enough support on campuses. And so that's one of the things we've learned, and this shows that. So which of the following ways do they collaborate? Support for faculty who are creating their own courses or experiences, 90%. 50% is co-creation of a new program. And domain expertise like multimedia production or assessment, and fewer curation of library resources. Well, that's great, because today we're going to talk about these top 2, co-creation of a new program and support for faculty who are creating their own courses. So I would like to hear, before we get going, just one more thing. I just want to really hear from you. What practices have you established to promote successful collaboration on your campuses? And what challenges do you encounter when partnering with faculty and partnering faculty with learning designers? So we're going to do a Padlet. And any of you guys who've been to our other webinars know that we often use Padlet. You just click on the link or copy the link. It's in the chat. And you can open up the Padlet on your computer and you hit that little plus button. Molly, if you could put the Padlet on the screen so people can see that, that'd be great. Yep. Hit the little plus button and start right. Time, hard to find time of the learning designer. Well, hello, if there's not enough learning designers out there, right? Yeah, that's very difficult, a real challenge. What else? Understanding the role of an ID, that's really interesting. And Karen, please feel free to chime in too. But one of the things, and Sandy, because you're on campus, but one of the things that we found is that there was a big study on learning designers and what does a learning designer actually do on a campus, or an instructional designer. And I mean, they do so many different things, and a lot of it really has nothing to do with learning design. It's technical support. It's helping to find content pieces. It's all different types of support, and it makes it very difficult to get that collaboration with the learning designer.
And Carrie, I was just going to say, for me personally, they've really helped me kind of make my learning path much easier for students to navigate. Yeah. They make it clear for my students just to get through it more successfully.
Right. That's really important. And that's a learn. And oftentimes a faculty member will come and ask you, can you help me post my content on the learning management system? And it becomes an opportunity to really think about the whole path and how to make assignments, activities, and how to make the path more clear for the students. QM, Quality Matters, that is a very good, that's very commonly used to establish a bar of what makes things successful. And we'll talk a little bit about a tool we've created that takes it even a little bit further in terms of helping to create a collaborative discussion. We have faculty course developer model. They have to apply to become a developer. Yes, that's great. And oftentimes, and I know Steve will talk to you a little bit at Central Ohio Technical College about how they have really faculty ambassadors who teach the other faculty and help.
There's some great points here. Understanding the role of an ID and how they can help. We were going to talk about that a little bit, how important that is to kind of establishing the relationship. And certainly, I think, Will, you brought that up about faculty not having enough time. And so how important it is to set that up properly or advantageously.
That's great.
And faculty not understanding the ways that IDs can even help. So that's part of the role development, but it's great to see, these are common challenges. And then we'll go into some of those more specifically with Stephen and Will and talk about how that worked out in our collaborations.
And as always, we'll come back to this on the question number 2. I know some of you have started to populate that, but we'll come back at the end. But as always, our Padlets will be available to you when we share our deck with you at the end of the session. So let's go back to the slide deck. So I just wanted to take just 5 minutes or less to talk about something that we believe very strongly is the starting point of collaboration and creation, and that's empathy. And that's empathy for the learner. It's grounded in empathy for the learner, but also empathy for each other when you're collaborating with each other. And for us, our designers, we train our designers to really, really understand, and we try to provide empathy because faculty have so many roles and responsibilities placed on them. And there's, as experts in your content area, you have so much to bring to students, but trying to get through in the way that students need to learn today, especially in this technology modalities, these different modalities, is very, very challenging. And the learning designer is the expert on helping you to get what you need, get the learning experience so that the students are very engaged and your expertise shines as a faculty member. So I want to show a slide about empathy that we use in our training series, but this is a Zoom room from a class. And if you look at it, you know, we have to remember the challenges that our learners are facing today. Housing and food insecurity are much more prevalent than we would like to believe in higher education. Bandwidth issues, you have to, you as faculty and as administrators at schools need to deal with that all the time. You know, there has been, COVID has left a lot of anxiety, and a lot of jobs have been displaced. So people are insecure because they don't know what the next job is. And sometimes, and many of them are in school because they're trying to take it to the next level or to their next career. So we have to kind of always put ourselves in the shoes of the learner. So we use a tool, we use several tools. And the next one I'd like to show here is the empathy map. And this is one of the tools that we use. We do it as a group oftentimes. It's a wonderful tool for putting yourself in the shoes of students. You can see, think about what they do when they're in your classroom, what they see, what they think, what they hear, what they say, what you want them to do, think, see, and hear, etc. What are their emotional needs? What are their physical needs? So as you start to think about that, and it's great to do that as a team with several faculty members, because you can get, you can really collaborate on thinking this through, and it grounds you right in the student's needs, and it grounds you beautifully. There's another way you can do it, which is you can kind of map the student journey in your class and think about that, like what is the journey the student goes through in my class, and how do I make sure that I'm very empathetic to the way they take that journey. So I just wanted to touch on something that I know some of you have been familiar with, which is our framework, which we call purposeful learning. And we're all about creating a humanized and inclusive learning experience. And that starts with learner empathy, but it also starts with and ends with both faculty and learner success. So it is our biggest joy to help faculty member be successful. And I noticed on the Padlet, one of you said you use a tool that's based on QM. We've created this tool called the Purposeful Learning Check, and it allows the faculty to go and reflect on the objectives of a purposeful learning and of a humanized learning experience, and also a instructionally sound, instructionally designed sound learning experience. And it's just 30 quick questions that faculty think about. They usually take about 15 minutes. But the whole intention of this is to self-reflect and to kind of create some ideas for yourself about how you might evolve your course with the learning designer. And so we typically follow that by a one-on-one hour-long session with the learning designer where you go through it together and talk about it. And I wanted to just mention this because it sets the stage for collaboration, because it's a completely unjudgmental, it's very objective tool that can create a common conversation as a starting point for collaboration. So I'm going to turn it over to Karen, who's going to introduce our two panelists in a greater way and is going to lead a discussion about collaborating.
Yeah, thank you, Carrie. And that's a perfect setup about using the empathy and those tools that we have. So Carrie introduced our two speakers today, and I just want to say that they come from somewhat similar in bringing dual perspectives of working individually with a learning designer to create a course of their own, and also having a role that kind of helps as a mentor in Stephen's case, and e-learning champion on his campus. And Will is the program chair so they were able to oversee other courses and programs and bring that. So I'm going to start with introduction of Will, because this was, as Carrie said, kind of a different dynamic, the co-creation dynamic, where the learning designer is part of a bigger team in really in building a whole program and the like, and helping to create the content. And that's what we did at VCU in the Homeland Security and Emergency Preparedness program there. They developed a whole new online master's program, and we worked with them over a period of 5 terms. And so providing that full support from the build and the media development, project management, and all of that. But I worked with Will on 2 different courses, and really developed that relationship, and it was beneficial in that he could take his experience as an individual working on a course and then see how that would apply and help support in the with other courses. His role was really to create the content and focus on that, and mine was to facilitate the process. In terms of the overall goals of the program, Will, I'm gonna let you kind of jump in here. These came from you in terms of your goals of facilitating the pedagogical excellence and best practices, but also I invite you to speak a little bit now about what you saw as the challenges and successes there, both from kind of the individual standpoint of working on your own course, what you gained or saw as the challenges, and as program chair.
Sure, absolutely. Thank you. And thanks for the opportunity to participate in this. We have, our graduate program was online, but not very interesting. And we wanted to create a really strong learning, interactive learning graduate program. We have 12 specific courses in our master's degree. And as department chair, I was able to kind of oversee and watch as faculty worked with their LD to build classes. And so I built 2 classes, and the first one I was assigned to work with Karen, and the second one I said, I want to work with her again, because it was a great educational experience for me, and I think we built really strong classes together. And earlier, Carrie talked about empathy. I was always impressed with the empathy demonstrated by Karen, because she would always ask, how's my schedule? How's my work? Do I have time to do the things I need to do? Nobody's ever asked me that before. People always just assume that we can do what we're supposed to do. But our program had some internal challenges of faculty being reluctant to change their existing courses, because some of them had taught those courses numerous times. And there's that phenomenon of, I've been doing it for so long and it's always worked. And it's hard to convince faculty to say, we like what you're doing, but it can be better. Not everybody wants to invest in that big change. So we had to take our current courses, improve them, integrate all the learning design elements, all the interactive learning pieces. And sometimes it was hard to stay on budget and on time. And a lot of faculty were very concerned about budget issues, getting into the weeds of how much it costs to do one interactive piece, when really that wasn't something they needed to do. What they needed to do was say, here's an idea, here's what I want, here's the information I want to convey. How can we do that most effectively? And that's the LD's job, to say, here are some tasks, or here are some ways to do it. Let me give you some examples. And then shape the ideas from the subject matter expert into feasible practices. And we had so many great successes, and my classes have, the first course we built has gone really smoothly now for 3 terms, and the other one will be offered coming up, and I'm very excited about both of those.
Yeah, thanks, Will. I like that, the way you said that, you know, taking those existing pressures and to come up with feasible solutions, and that's kind of how it all worked together. So then let me turn over and introduce Stephen. And as Carrie said, this was a slightly different model, where at Central Ohio, the idea is that they are kind of running their own program and driving it, and we're providing more support in a more consultative fashion. They had kind of a big challenge. So Stephen Huizenga, professor of philosophy, and as I said, also serving as a champion and mentor. I don't know how many people have been turning to you lately, but I know a few have been saying, I asked Stephen about that. And so I know that's keeping you busy. And so in terms of working with O'Donnell to develop some of the best practices, and then your roles are also to help roll those best practices out to the rest of your faculty as they move into using Canvas. So that was a particularly challenging year with COVID and changing an LMS. And I know many people can relate to that. So Stephen, I'm going to let you kind of speak to those like Will did, speak to the goals and challenges and successes here and kind of how that all worked for you from both standpoints.
So I think when I was first hired at Central Ohio Technical College about 10 years ago, there was a rush to get courses online, right? Online courses were, everybody needed to be online to compete and to be, and 10 years into it, everybody sort of got their courses and got settled and we were done. And I think that there's been sort of a circling back now to, okay, we have them online, but are they really as good as they can be? And in the last 10 years, you know, understanding how to teach online has really flourished. And there's been a lot of attention given to not just getting content online, but getting it in a way where your students can really receive it. And COTC, Central Ohio Technical College, is going through a shift where we're sort of circling back on our courses, all of our courses in every department, in every area of the college, and saying, okay, are they as good as they can be? And let's circle back on our courses and moving programs entirely online, but doing it qualitatively in a much better way, and trying to bring in best practices. So our goals were, they're listed here, but to develop a team of faculty experts to act as resources for others. So we're a smaller college and don't have the budget that others might have. And so we rely on our faculty to assist one another. And we have a core set of faculty who are kind of the drivers. They're the STPs, right? The same 10 people who are kind of engaged and really want to know and want to help everybody else. And really, we've been engaged in a process and bringing O'Donnell in to sort of work with those, and it's not actually 10 people, it's 12, but to work with those folks and to bring them along and to make them trainers. And O'Donnell's done an excellent job coming alongside us, kind of helping our faculty be the resource within our own institution and teaching us how to teach. And as a part of that process, we're trying to institutionalize this sort of commitment to really quality online education and remote learning opportunities. And so O'Donnell has come alongside us and helped us develop a design toolkit that will, talk about the requirements and then good ideas and, what are best practices in these different areas. So those have been our goals. Did you want me to speak to the challenges as well?
I think so, Stephen. Just as I said, so kind of the challenges of, and I'm going to ask you guys and facilitate more of a dialogue of, through some questions, but just I put it down, you were facing with the challenges of switching an LMS and having to try and make this shift in philosophy and getting people to start thinking about their courses in new ways. But if you were to think about the challenge of working with a learning designer, kind of what was that for you on an individual basis as we started collaborating? Kind of, right. Was there anything that was a particular challenge or a surprise?
Well, I had not worked with a learning designer previously. And so working with Karin, and Karin was the learning designer that I worked with as well, right? So working with Karin, I think initially when we first came to the process, I was a little concerned about learning designers more or less overstepping their bounds and telling me how to teach my content. And I teach philosophy courses, and I'll be honest with you, I think most people, when I tell them I teach philosophy, have no idea what I do for a living. They could not even conceive of my courses, let's be honest. And everybody thinks they have an idea of what philosophy is, but really they don't. And Karin was very just not only helping me create courses that were empathetic to my students, but Karin brought that empathy to me, saying, you're the content expert. Let me walk alongside you and you tell me what the goals are. You describe these to me. And so my own hesitation was about having a learning designer that was going to kind of railroad, well, here's my vision for your course, and here's what I think a philosophy course should look like. And that's really just not what happened at all. That was a challenge for me. I think I have administrators who don't really have a clue what I teach. And so for a lot of times conversations with them are a bit strained by that, but that was the great concern that I had initially walking into this, but it really wasn't a concern at the end of the day.
Yeah, thanks, Stephen. I think people on this webinar can probably relate to that it's a pretty common concern. It's like, what's this learning designer who's coming in here to tell me what to do on the standpoint of faculty. And Will, I think, other instructors that I, worked with express, kind of had that similar, and as a program chair, you probably heard a little bit of that concern.
Yeah, I love the interactive learning pieces. I think those are some of the strongest elements of our courses, and so many online courses are dull. There's a discussion forum, there's a online submission of materials, there's occasional back and forth between a faculty member and students, or students and students. But to have interactive exercises that really foster learning, that's the difference between a good or fair class and a really outstanding class. And I think that the classes we built together will be outstanding because of the experience and vision that the LD brings. I know my content and I know how to deliver it in one way, but being thrown a bunch of different options and say, "Ooh, that's the one. That's what is going to work," or these 2 or 3 approaches, they'll make the material really resonate with students. I like that a lot. I was amazed at how interested Karin was in our subjects. And I think that an LD that is, that's kind of a knowledge flirt, somebody who likes to learn things about a whole bunch of different things, I can see that as being kind of the perfect LD, finding almost everything fascinating. Because in higher education, there's so much out there that's fascinating. I can see a philosophy course being a wonderful place for interactive learning elements. I mean, I'm envisioning this Zeno's paradox kind of stepwise learning scenario where you have to walk through each step and figure out, how do you get to the end? And there's no end. That's the lesson. I think that'd be fun.
And to piggyback off that, and not just because of the wonderful paradox reference, but to piggyback off what Dr. Pelfrey is saying, is one of the things that Karin brought to the table, and one of the things that I really changed my mind is as Karin and I were developing the course, one of the things I realized is that the instructional designer, when you think of okay, I've got to work with my online course and do this, the burden on an instructor, conceptually, you begin to get very nervous. This is a lot of work. This is a lot of things to get through. And I honestly felt, in working with Karin, the longer we worked together, what she was doing was saying, was almost taking things off of my plate, getting things out of my backpack, making my load easier, and helping me realize that good instruction, a lot of times online, was really me getting out of the way of my own course. And that will sound a bit odd to hear, but that really is sort of what ultimately was kind of one of the main takeaway for me from my first experience working with Karin. And I'm on to a second experience with a different course, but just feeling like, well, this is a lot, the ideas and what's brought to the table just really lifted the burden for me as a faculty. And that really was relieving, to say the least.
I have a question. I want to jump in for 1 second. One of the things that came up a lot is, that oftentimes people are confused about the role of the learning designer and instructional designer. And I wonder if you had either one of you had any advice for people for anyone who really feels that, like how we can clarify that and how to make it easier. Any one of the three of you, actually.
Sure. The LD brings in tools that I don't have or that I can't envision. I mean, academics tend to think they're really smart, and they are, but in a narrow lane. And the LD has experiences in other kinds of classes, working with a variety of populations of students. So I know my students, I know my content, but I have to be able to think outside those lanes. And somebody who can throw me a bunch of examples of different interactive learning approaches, different ways to present material, and say these kinds of tactics worked with or these kinds of approaches worked with other populations, other students. I just don't know what I don't know. And until I see new approaches, I'm not going to envision their potential or their success. And I was always very happy when Karin let me say no. And I could say, I don't think that's going to resonate. I don't think that's the right approach. And she would say, no problem. Let's let's look at this. And almost like a salesperson, you've got to be willing to get 1,000 no's, knowing that at some point you're going to get a yes. And we worked really well doing that, saying, that's not it. That's not it. Boom, there it is. And then we ran as fast as we could down that path that we thought would work.
Yeah, thanks for bringing that up, Will, because that is something that I think is very effective, when we're talking about roles, and to make that really clear at the very beginning, what each person's expertise is in their role, but also then allowing that expertise to really, come through. And it's like, yeah, you definitely have that. If you don't want to do that and you don't think it's right, be sure to say that. And it just makes the decision making much more efficient along the way. Stephen, did you have other thing you wanted to, it looked like you were going to add on to that?
Yeah, I fully agree with Dr. Pelfrey. There's a philosopher who talks about speaking and listening, how to listen well. And he talks about the fact that speaking and listening is like pitching and catching. And I think Dr. Pelfrey's right. As a content expert, I've got a lot of pitches that I can throw to my students, and I think they're all so interesting. But I'm not always aware of my students, and a good learning designer is going to come alongside you and be that board that sort of says, well, here are options, right? Of options in instructional design that I'm just not aware of. If it comes to philosophy of religion or modern philosophy, I can get in there and these are the things I'd like them to know. But how to get them to know that is the step, and how to connect the knowledge that I have to the receivers, the ones who are to get that knowledge, and understanding how connecting those dots and that new role that learning designers play has been pivotal for altering and improving our courses. So, yeah.
That's great. So I was going to ask a few other questions that kind of overlap with a lot of what you've already brought up, but and they're very broad. But one was what was the greatest challenge for you in starting to work with a learning designer? And I think you've kind of hit on this in that, Stephen, what you said about, well, they're coming in. How are what are they going to do? What are they really going to provide? But that kind of gets to, what were your expectations? What was it you thought a learning designer might bring you? And then how did that change in terms of, how you started interacting and what made it successful? Either of you, in terms of any other expectations that you had coming in? Or were you told, Stephen, were you told you would be working with a learning designer?
No, in our case, when we brought O'Donnell in and to work with a group of volunteers initially. So we have kind of this tiered system where we're training a core group of faculty who will then talk to other faculty. So because we're doing this institutionally, just across the entire institution, in order to get faculty buy-in, because there's always that hesitancy with faculty, right, when they have to change their courses and that, our approach has been to get those same 12 people kind of in and familiar, and let them be the ones who connect with our more distal faculty on these sorts of things. And I think it's one of the things, one of the challenges that we face, and this is maybe an indirect answer to your question, is really a culture change at the institution, and getting faculty to the point where we say, hey, you're teaching your online courses, thank you for doing that. We think we can all do better. And we'd like to create a new culture around online course instruction and teaching where faculty feel free to fail, to swing for the fences and really try to develop good content. And if it doesn't work, to circle back and to go at it again. And to really strive for not perfection, getting it right the first time, every time, but for excellence. That is getting up once you fall down and always trying to reach your students and creating this just cycle of improvement. And that's, of course, an institutional culture change, right? So that's what's involved for us. And what O'Donnell has done wonderfully is just create this culture with these same 12 people, with these core 12 people, of saying, okay, let's try this. I get the idea that this might really work well, and learn this is okay. Here are ways to accomplish this goal. And then you go at it. And if it doesn't work, you circle back with the learning designer and go, okay, what else do we got? And if it does work, you celebrate the win and you move forward. But a lot of our biggest challenge has been just changing the mindset as a whole, that it's okay to really try to develop a good course. And if things don't go perfectly the first time, that's all right. We circle back and we do it again. There are any number of ways to try to reach your students, as long as you're always trying to reach your students. And the learning designers certainly shortcut that process, because you have that knowledge of the tools and what's effective and not, and maybe where we've not been as effective as we could be. But bit of a ramble, but yeah.
Oh, that's great. Well, it's so fortunate that you have that culture coming through to support the work of that collaboration between the learning designer. I mean, that really facilitates a good working relationship. Will, did you have anything else to add? And then I want to kind of turn to kind of what are your tips and your advice for people, learning designers and faculty, kind of the 2 or 3 things that you would really hit on there.
Sure, thank you. We had problems with time. And that's true for most people. Faculty members are pulled in a lot of different directions, particularly tenure track faculty members that are doing research. And we were able to negotiate course releases for faculty members who were building classes. And that was huge, because that gave people some time, not as much as everybody needed, but some time to really invest in the process. And as Dr. Hazinga said, there's no perfect class. I have never taught a perfect class, and probably never will, but it's an iterative process. And I convinced the faculty members in my department. As chair, I'm a benevolent dictator. So I told everybody, we're doing this, and here's why we're going to do this. We're going to take good classes and make them great. And I said, you can improve your class step by step, but here's an opportunity to improve your class by a huge leap. Let's leverage the knowledge and experience of our LDs and change your class from something that's working well to something that could be amazing.
Yeah, great. Thank you. So I know we're kind of getting towards time-wise. We want to be sensitive to time. Molly, I don't know if you want to switch over to the slide that are tips for faculty and designer collaboration. And we've hit on a few of these, and then invite Will and Stephen to kind of add on to them. But this idea of establishing this relationship of mutual respect, and the idea of empathy coming through at the very beginning, clarifying the roles, and using some of the tools to help identify the priorities from each perspective. So kind of really understanding where each is coming from helps. And then keeping in mind through something like the the empathy map, finding that common ground on that learner perspective. So you guys have really already brought these, most of these points up, but I invite you to add on to that. And the one about truly listening and being open, and that sometimes that takes a while, as Sandy, as you might know, as a learning designer, or working with learning designers as well, that it might not happen at first, but it eventually does happen, that people come through and faculty will say, oh, okay, I get it, you know, and then being much more receptive. So that's one of my tips that I would say for learning designers is don't give up, you know, just if people seem resistant at first, just keep going. So anything to add there, you guys, about?
Yes. So the successes of others can inspire future successes. And when I saw the classes that some of my faculty were building, I really realized I was going to have to work hard to catch up to them. So I think that the examples of successful classes and even pieces within classes that can really push faculty to come up with ideas or come up with new steps. And we had a lot of faculty meetings where we sat around and said, what's working in your build, in your course build, and what's not working? And then everybody got to learn from the things that didn't work. So that first round of cannon fodder, those first 3 faculty that built their courses, they had things that didn't work and they managed to figure those out. But then everybody after them was able to avoid that pitfall or find a way around it. So those successes really set us on a great path for every other class build to be successful.
Stephen, anything you wanted to add there?
We've had a similar experience. We're not all in the same department. I'm working with people who are teaching psychology to biology to nursing to radiological rad tech to all these different areas. And what's interesting is the sort of, you know, to Dr. Pelfrey's point, you know, there's the sort of first round of people that go through it and then struggle. But what we've had happen is all the people who are working with learning designers are actually talking back channel using different Microsoft Teams, and we set up a team where we can all get in there and we're chatting and we're discussing and we're sharing things that are working and things that are not. And we're actually going to be institutionalizing that into sort of a learning center where we're sharing our successes and our failures with all faculty, having little brown bags where we're doing that. And that whole, so we're having a similar experience in terms of just reshaping a culture and this sort of cycle of improvement where even struggles and failures are becoming a part of a loop of success, not just for my courses, but for everyone's. And it's interesting the way that when you open it up for faculty that way, when you bring in this empathy for your students and you bring in empathy for the faculty, all of a sudden it changes the culture in a faculty. And it's a really interesting dynamic to watch as this group of people begin to work together and to share ideas and it'll be interesting to watch the sort of spread throughout our entire campus, which is exactly what we wanted to have happen. Mm-hmm. And it's working beautifully to this point.
Yeah, that's great. So that tip of the providing the models and examples and the example faculty and the courses is really key there. So I want to just wrap up with kind of a few best practices. I mean, there's so many things that I could talk about and it was really hard, but we talked about building that relationship as being essential. And I didn't hit too much on this, and that's more from my perspective as a learning designer and it's different in different engagements, but for the learning designer to make the process of the development as easy as possible through setting up and sharing materials, having a clear schedule, a schedule that is communicated clearly and consistently is really key, so that faculty don't have to be bothered with any of those details. And then, as I mentioned, the mutual goals of tying back into the learner, and then having tools that will help faculty stay focused on the learning design of, yes, we do want outcomes. How are the assessments going to support and measure those outcomes and tie in with those? So providing those tools and the like to support good learning design. So I want to wrap it up there, and then I think turn it back over to Carrie or whomever, unless Stephen will, you know, I think you've given us great advice, and thank you so much for that. So Carrie?
Yeah, if you have any parting words of advice, Stephen or Will, you're welcome to jump on in again.
Yeah, I always think that what's going on in my head is crystal clear. And it usually isn't. So it's great to have somebody, in my case, Karen, who was wonderful, push back and say, what message are you trying to communicate here? Which learning objective does this piece support? And because I knew that she had the same purpose as I did, which was to build a really wonderful class, there was never an ego issue or a problem. It always went so well. And when she said, this isn't clear, I really appreciated that, because it made me think, well, why am I doing this? What's important about this message? And how can I make it most effective? Usually that happens in a class where I say something and everybody gives me that dead stare that some of the students do when you're not making sense. I am able to circumvent that with the classes that we built together. That's a great feeling.
That's awesome.
I have particularly appreciated when you're redesigning a course or developing a course, it can feel pretty daunting. And it feels like there are so many loose ends to tie up and so many things on your radar that you feel like you need to do. And one of the things that I have really appreciated about my time with a learning designer, and with Karen in particular, is that she will, at the end of our session, say, okay, here are the tangible things to accomplish this time. She has in her mind that sort of architecture about how we're going to get to our goal. So where I'm feeling overwhelmed and they just feel like, okay, I've got to make assessments and I've got to do this and I've got to write this narrative, and then when we're really set on this, and Karen can come along and say, okay, calm, breathe. Here are the steps that we want to do, and can really help me organize what is a flood of information in my mind and put it into a usable form where I can develop and makes that process much, much smoother. So
it's awesome. So as always, we'd like to end this with a moment of reflection. And let's go back to our Padlet. Maybe throw that in chat again if you don't have it up on your screen. Let's go back and go to the question number 2. What one thing will you do differently at your institution to promote the most effective faculty designer collaboration? So just take a moment to let us know. Some people have already started on this. So, oh, wow, we've got a lot of, so provide examples of successful classes. That's a very good thing. Clear process timeline from beginning of the collaboration. Frequent contact forms. And frequent contact, I would imagine, right? More proactive when possible. Preach. It's missionary, isn't it, right? We feel like we're missionaries so often. Really empathy for the faculty and for the learner. And connecting to peer faculty members who have content expertise, and that's really what they're doing so successfully at Central Ohio. That's great. Well, I'm gonna go, let's wrap this up. Thank you so much for participating. We got a section on session resources here, and then we're gonna just go right to the next webinar, Mal. And so our next webinar is Brett Christie, our Director of Learning Experience Design, is going to be back with us, and he's going to co-facilitate a section on pride and equity in the learning experience. So it's going to be an equity-focused session that focuses on pride and on gender. And we're really excited to have Dr. Leanne Shell-Bees from Colorado Mountain College joining Brett. So please join us at the next one, and we really look forward to having you having you with us next time. So thank you.